Well, good morning, Bayshore. Who's excited to be at church this morning? Well, it is so good to see all of you this morning. If we have not met before, my name is Cotter, and I'm the Next Steps pastor here. And every Sunday, we've got people that are joining us online through the Church Center app and through YouTube. So can we make some noise for our online family today? Now, how many of you guys love going to the beach? That's what Rehoboth is all about, right? Gotta love going to the beach if you're in Rehoboth. One of the coolest things about where we live here on the Eastern Shores, there's so many different beaches that we can go to. And so our family's favorite beach is a little bit further south. It's in Fenwick Island. Have many of you guys been down to Fenwick? Don't tell anybody about it. It's awesome. And so one of the cool things about Fenwick is it feels like you're in a totally different world, but there's horses down there. Everywhere. Like if you're driving your car, there's just horses in the road and you just have to sit there and wait for them to move. If you're on the beach, the horses are walking up and down the beach. It's a totally different place. And so we were down there earlier this summer, my family, my wife, and our two sons. We've got a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so getting to the beach with 2 young kids is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. You got to dig them holes. You got to get them toys, set out all these umbrellas. Putting sunscreen on kids it should be illegal. It's too hard. And so I remember the good old days when it was just Emily and I that would go to the beach and we would just take a surfboard, take some books, and we would take nothing else. And it was so relaxing. But now it's a lot of work to get down to the beach. And so we get down to the beach that day, we get all our things out. Each kid has their own hole that we dug for them, and they got all their toys. And Emily and I are sitting under the umbrella, just kind of relaxing. And then the horses came down on the beach. And listen, the tourists think that the horses are your friends. They think you can just give them a hug, take a picture with them. They're not. The horses are wild, and so they will bite you. They will eat your stuff. They'll give you a good kick in the head if you sneak up behind them. They are no joke. And so when the horses come down on the beach, you kind of have to get up and move out of the way and leave your stuff alone and hope they don't eat it. And so horses are coming down the beach. We kind of abandon all of our things and move off to the side. And the horses come by, and thankfully they went right past all of our stuff. They didn't eat our food. They ate somebody else's food, which, we were fine with at the time. And so we were chilling. We went back to our stuff. The kids were playing again. And then the horses did a U-turn, which I've never seen the horses do a U-turn before. And they came back right to our stuff. And I got a photo of the horse. He fell asleep right under our umbrella. Right under it. And the other horse had walked off. He got distracted by something. When he saw this, he came right over. And you know where he laid? Right on my beach towel. And they just slept there for so much time. It was so ridiculous. We thought it was going to be a beach day for the 4 of us and a nice relaxing time for our family. It wasn't. It was 6 of us that day. We had to be very generous with our spot on the beach that day. And generosity is a big part of the Christian life. It is something that God has modeled for us, and it's a way that we can respond to His grace and His mercy. Each day we have the opportunity to be generous with our time and our energy and our resources. And so today we're continuing our Buckle Up series. We're going to be looking at the Old Testament to read about King David's preparations for building God's temple as we see the importance of generosity in our lives. So we'll be in the book of 1 Chronicles today, and at this point in Israel's history, King David is nearing the end of his life. He has been the king that God used to unite the nation, establish Jerusalem as its capital, and lead Israel through some of its greatest years. And David wanted to build a permanent temple for God. But God told him that he would not be the one who would build the temple. Instead, that responsibility would belong to his son, Solomon. And so David spent the final years of his life preparing for this project that he would never personally get to see completed. So he gathered materials, he organized workers, and he made plans for the construction of this building. And here in chapter 29, he challenges the leaders and the people of Israel to join him in giving generously towards God's work. In the first few verses of this chapter, we can see David give generously to this project. And then he encourages his leaders to also follow his example and also give generously towards this project. So they do. And And after seeing this amazing response of generosity towards the Lord, David praised God in prayer. And that's where we're going to hop in today. So we're in 1 Chronicles chapter 29. We're going to start by looking at verse 10. If you got your Bible, you can go ahead and turn there. If you came to church and you need a Bible, we've got free Bibles every single Sunday out in the lobby. The coffee's free and the Bibles are free. So please grab a Bible if you need one this morning, or you can follow along. All of our verses will be on the screens as well. So let's check this out. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, starting in verse 10. It says, David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You're exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name. This is an amazing prayer. David has long held this dream of building this temple for God. And so he gives generously towards this project. He gives gold and silver, bronze and iron, all kinds of fine stone and marble, and all in large quantities. And he gives all of these cheerfully to the Lord. And then he calls on his leaders to do the same, and they give generously to God. And then with everyone together, he prays this prayer that we just read. And I love this prayer, because this prayer is all about God. It is all about God. It's not about David. David's not asking for strength. He's not asking for wisdom or health. David's not asking for a bigger house. He's not asking for cheaper gas prices. David's not asking for anything. It's not about him at all. David's prayer is fully focused on praising the God of the universe because God is so incredible. And so there's this way of praying that's called the Acts model of prayer. And we'll put this up on the screen. So you know something in church is going to be awesome if there's an acronym attached to it. Just automatically means it's going to be great, or it's from the 90s, one of those two things. But first we start by adoring God. Second, we confess our sins. Third, we thank God. And fourth is supplication, which is a church word for saying we make requests to God. And this is such a good roadmap because typically when we think about prayer, we just jump straight to step 4. Making requests of God. God, please help me pay the bills. Please help me to have patience with my kids. Please help me with all these different things that are going on in my life. And that's an important part of prayer, but it's not the first step of prayer. Years ago, shortly after my wife, Emily, and I got married, I remember going to these Tuesday morning prayer meetings at the church that we were at the time. And it was so early on Tuesday mornings, and 6 or 8 of us would get together to pray, and we would use this Acts model of prayer. It was the first time I really saw it used. And so we'd spend the first 15 minutes or so just praising God for his greatness. So someone would praise God for his holiness, and then someone else would praise God for being the creator who made the planets and the stars. Someone else would praise God for being full of mercy and grace and perfect wisdom, and around it would go. And I love that time each week because it was such a great time to recenter on all the ways that God is so amazing. And that time was so different than any prayer meeting that I'd ever been to before, because we didn't start by just asking God for things. It wasn't about us at all. We started praising God for how great he is. And that's what David's doing here in 1 Chronicles. He praises God for being eternal. He praises God for his greatness, his power, his majesty, his splendor. He praises God for owning and controlling all things. He praises God for being the ultimate ruler, the holder of strength and power. David is praising God's greatness. So here's our first thought this morning, and we'll put this on the screen. A generous life starts with praise. Generous life starts with praise. Praising God helps us to see how small we are in comparison to the creator of the universe. Now, we all have this tendency to go through life thinking of ourselves as the main character. I think all of life is just about us. Like when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I'm thinking about, what do I need to accomplish today? Where do I need to be today? What are my priorities? What are my wants and desires and goals? We see life through the lens of our routines and our feelings, our battles, our pain. But praising God reframes things for us because it reminds us that life really isn't about us. Life is about God. So he gave freely and generously to us, and so we can give freely and generously back to him. Each day when we wake up, before we even get out of bed, we should say, God, thank you for giving me another day to be alive. Thank you for putting breath in my lungs, strength in my body. Thank you for another day to praise you. And framing our time and our energy and our resources like that, it just totally changes how we view our lives, because another day to be alive, it's not a guarantee, it's a blessing. And what a privilege it is to be blessed by God and experience his blessing. Praising God reminds us that life is all about God, and that framing leads us to having a generous heart, because life is about so much more than us. Let's hop back into these verses. We read the beginning of David's prayer, and we'll continue in with the next verse here, which is verse 14. David says, "But who am I and who are my people that we could give anything to you? Everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us. We are here for only a moment, visitors and strangers in the land, as our ancestors were before us. Our days on earth are like a passing shadow, gone so soon without a trace." So David looks at all the things that they've given to God for the construction of the temple: the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, the wood, the fine stones and marble, all of these things. And his reaction is, he says, who are we that we could give anything to you, God? Everything that we have has come from you, and we're only giving back to you what you first gave to us. David recognized that God owns everything. And giving their treasures to God is not something they've done to puff themselves up, to say, hey, look at how generous we are. Look at how amazing all of these things are that we gave to God. That's not their attitude at all. Their attitude is one of humility, recognizing that everything that they have has come from God, and giving back to God is just a recognition of God's ownership over all things. He says, we've given to you only what you first gave to us. So our two sons, they love carrying their wallets around everywhere. And so our oldest son, he's got a tractor wallet. And our youngest son has a Spider-Man wallet, which is super cool. And so my parents watch our kids during the week while Emily and I are working. And at my parents' house, our kids are living the ultimate Eastern Shore farmer lifestyle. So my parents live like surrounded by cornfields, and so when my kids are down there, they're just always watching the local farmers plant and harvest the crops throughout the year. The kids have these gardens down there, and so all week long they're just planting and watering their veggies and having fun out in the garden. They sent me a picture this week of my mom did of this giant pumpkin that they got out of the garden that they grew this year. It's crazy. So they just love all of these outdoor things. They love produce, and so in the summertime, one of their favorite things to do is to go to this produce stand that's near my parents' house. And so every morning before we leave the house, the kids are asking me, Dad, can we bring our wallets today so we can buy watermelon and corn from the produce stand? And that's how I know I live on the Eastern Shore. So that's what they're asking me for in the morning. Now listen, our oldest is 4, our youngest is 3. And so if you're wondering what's actually inside of their wallets, it's mostly toys. And stickers and magnets and Band-Aids and whatever else they can fit inside of there. It's not really money. I've never given them a single dollar to put inside their wallets. They're kids. What do they need money for, you know? But every once in a while, I'll look in there and I'll see this money and I'll ask them, like, where did you get this money from? Where did this come from? And they always tell me that my mom gave it to them. And so my mom gives them money, and they keep it in their wallets, and then they use her money to buy things from the produce stand as if they're the ones that are actually buying things. But it's not even their money. It's my mom's money that they're spending. And that's how David describes his life here in these verses. And we'll put verse 14 back up on the screen. As he's praying, David says, everything that we have has come from you. We give you only what you first gave us. We give you only what you first gave us. David is recognizing that everything that he has, his position as king, his resources, his life, they're his because God first gave those things to him. In verse 4 of the previous chapter, David says that God chose him to be king over Israel. He doesn't attribute his position as king to being something that he earned based on his own merit or his accomplishments. He says that God gave him that position. David had great faith and David worked hard, but God alone made David the king. And so all the resources that David had, all the wealth that came from being the king, he only had those things because God gave it to him. That's why David gave so freely to the Lord. Everything in his life came from God, so David didn't take any ownership of it. He recognized that it was all God's to begin with. And so for David, when it came to giving to God, he gave generously because everything he had was all God's to begin with. And he was just giving part of it back to God. So here's what we should learn from this. We'll put this on the screen. Generosity is a recognition of God's ownership. Generosity is a recognition of God's ownership. When we understand that everything that we have is God's possession to begin with, we're not selfish with it because it's not ours to be selfish with. So we give freely because God gave freely to us. So a few times each year, I have the opportunity to play music in a band with a few of my friends, and we got a photo of us from a concert we played earlier this spring. And these guys are awesome. They're all worship leaders at their churches and just really, really great guys. And so I grew up loving music. Like I've been playing guitar for as long as I can remember. And I started playing bass when these guys asked me to join the band several years ago. And music is like a relaxed hobby for me now. I was way more into it when I was younger, but now it's a relaxed hobby. It's not something I spend any money on. And so I have not bought an instrument for myself in a very long time, not since I was in college. And so when I was in college, I made a very big investment. One of my friends was selling this old bass for $20. And at first I thought, okay, back then you could get 4 Chipotle burritos for $20. So I wasn't sure at first, but I made the investment. I bought this bass. And so this $20 bass is what I've been playing in the band. And if you play music, a $20 instrument sounds like a $20 instrument. Like it's not great at all. And so each summer we get together as a band and we play this 4th of July concert. And so we were practicing for that earlier this summer. And one week, Steve, who's one of the guitar players and the main singer in our band, he brought me this bass that he had bought recently. And he said, hey, you can borrow this for our concert this year. And this bass is so nice. His case for the bass is worth like 20 times more than my bass is worth, like just the case. It's so nice. And so he let me borrow it so I could play it for our concert. And I was just so thankful for that. It sounds so much better than the $20 bass that I have. And so I played it and I loved it. And then as soon as our concert was over, 4th of July, I gave it right back to Steve, put it right back in his truck. And he was gracious enough to let me borrow it, but it's always been his bass. And here's why I share this. In the same way that I was borrowing Steve's instrument, all of the resources that we have are borrowed from God. The fact that Steve's bass was sitting in my house for a few weeks, it didn't mean that I owned it. It just meant that I was borrowing it. And that's how we should view everything that God has entrusted into our care. Our career, our family, our time, our money, all of it is God's. So how can we be faithful with what God has given us? How do we use our career and our time and our money to bring glory to God? How do we lead our family into a relationship with God? Well, let's look at verse 15 one more time. We'll place this back on the screen. David says, we're here for only a moment, visitors and strangers in the land as our ancestors were before us. Our days on earth are like a passing shadow gone so soon without a trace. So in this part of David's prayer, we see such a distinct contrast between God being eternal. David says that God is from everlasting to everlasting. And that's so different from our lives, which he says are so brief. He compares the duration of our lives to a passing shadow. So God is from everlasting to everlasting, and our lives are just a passing shadow. And if you think about what David's trying to accomplish here, he's trying to gather resources to build a temple for God, a place where God can be praised. A building that's going to last much longer than David's life, which he knows is coming to an end. David wants to make a lasting impact. He has an opportunity, he has resources, he has power, and he wants to make the most of what God has placed before him. And what we need to ask ourselves this morning, we'll put this on the screen, is what impact do we want to have? What impact do we want to have? We all have things that God has entrusted into our care. We have time, we have energy, we have resources. And how we steward what God has given us determines what impact we'll have. If you have kids, what impact do you want to have on your kids' lives? This is something that my wife Emily and I talk about all the time with our young kids. We are always trying to think through what we're teaching our kids about Jesus, what example we're setting for them, what life lessons we are teaching to them, what influences we're exposing them to. We want our kids to grow up to be men of integrity, men that love Jesus, and every day we have a chance to make an impact on them? What impact do we want to have with our career? What opportunities do we have at work to show God's grace and his love to the people that we work with? What impact do we want to have with our time? How are we using our time that we have each day to serve and to be a blessing to the people around us? What impact do we want to have with our money? How can we use our money and our resources to bless other people? How can we use it to impact other people's eternity? And look, a lot of times when it comes to our money, like it's easy to feel like everyone just wants a piece of it. Netflix wants our money. Power company wants our money. Man, the power company emailed me this week and said, hey, we haven't been taking enough money from you this year. We're going to take more, and we're going to make up for it the next couple months, which I don't understand. The internet company wants our money. Taxes want our money. Our kids want our money for the produce stand. And so when we think about giving our money to the church, giving our money to God, it can feel like one more burden, one more obligation, one more line on the budget spreadsheet, one more place we're just required to send our money. But that's not at all the example that David set here for us. David gave out of joy. David gave willingly. David gave to God because he knew many people would worship God in that temple, and he wanted to see God be praised. That was the impact that David was investing in. Let's keep reading in chapter 29. We'll pick back up with the next verse, which is verse 16. It says, O Lord our God, even this material we have gathered to build a temple to honor your holy name comes from you. It all belongs to you. I know, my God, that you examine our hearts and rejoice when you find integrity there. You know I have done all this with good motives, and I have watched your people offer their gifts willingly and joyously. So David is reflecting on his heart when he gave to God for the completion of this temple, and he's reflecting on the hearts of the people as they gave. And look at how he describes the attitude that's in their heart. He says that they had good motives. He said they gave willingly, they gave joyously. Now, when I pay the electric bill each month, I don't do that joyously. When I pay the car insurance, I don't do that willingly. I pay those bills out of an obligation, but giving money to God is so different. Giving money to God is something we do with good motives, something we do willingly and joyously, because giving money to God is a privilege. When we give money to God, we're saying, God, everything in my life comes from you, and I would not have a single penny if it weren't for you. So I'm going to give part of my money back knowing that you own all of it. Now, I'd like to spend a few minutes answering some questions about giving financially to God, because we all have different backgrounds when it comes to money, when it comes to church, and some of us have been in church our whole lives, and the concept of giving money to God is familiar. Others of you might be here for the very first time, and you're just wondering, is this guy going to stop talking so I can get a good spot on the beach? And listen, there's plenty of time for a spot on the beach. The sun doesn't set till 8 tonight. We got lots of time to get to the beach. But the first question you may be wondering is why do we give money to God? Why do we give our money to God? Well, we give money to God because everything that we have comes from him. If we have a job, if we collect retirement, wherever our income comes in from, we can trace it back to God. Work is a blessing. An income is a blessing, and it doesn't exist without God putting it in our lives. So giving part of our money back to God is us acknowledging that everything we have comes from him. And so whether our resources are small or large, it's all from God. That's why we give, because it's all his to begin with. And if you think about this verse, where the people were giving willingly and joyously, those attitudes reflect God's ownership. God has graciously given us resources, and having the opportunity to give back to him, that's a blessing. That's where the willingness and the joy come from. The next question you may be wondering is how much do we give to God? If I want to give to God, how much do I give to him? Where do I start? Well, I was asked this question by one of my friends a couple months ago. He was thinking about buying a house. He's being very responsible. He was doing his budgeting, making sure that he and his wife could afford it before buying it. And so he called me and he asked me, he said, hey, how much money should I be giving to God? And I was nervous about that conversation. So I was trying to ease my way in a little bit. I was kind of asking him about, his mortgage and his financial flexibility. And he said, dude, I know that you're holding back on me. Just tell me. He's like, we want to honor God with our money. Just tell me straight up, how much should we give to God? And I love that attitude, because he was saying God owns it all, and I want to follow him, and just tell me straight up, how do I honor God with our money? That's what we want to do. So how much should we give to God? Well, the Bible consistently describes what we should give to God as a tithe, which means a tenth, 10%. And that's the biblical model that we see. And look, if you're starting from 0% and you're trying to get to 10%, that might feel like a big hurdle in your mind. And so you can work your way up. You can start at 1%, 2%, 4%, and work your way up. But listen, when you're trying to make a decision about how much money to give to God, don't make a decision based on what your spreadsheet says about your budget. Don't make a decision based on what your financial advisor says you can afford to give. Pray about this. Number one, just pray about this. And ask God, how much money do you want me to give to you? And you may pray, and God may say, 10% isn't enough. I want you to give more than that. But pray about it. And look, I'll just tell you from my life, I grew up in a family where we had very modest resources. And I saw my parents tithe every single Sunday. And if we missed a Sunday at church, the next Sunday they brought 2 checks with them to tithe. Giving God his money was never a question for my parents. And that goes for times where their income was steady. And it goes for times when life was really, really hard and my parents really didn't have any money. And they were really, really challenged financially. No matter what their situation was, they always gave God his money. And man, as a kid, I saw that. I sat next to them in that pew every Sunday and I saw them give their money to God. And so that's always been my attitude towards money. It's been my wife's attitude towards money. That's how she grew up, what she saw her parents do. And so that's our family's mindset. When our finances are normal, we tithe. And in times when we've struggled, in times when we've wondered, how are we going to pay the mortgage? In times when we've wondered, how are we going to afford groceries this week? We tithe, always. We always give God his money. It's never a question for us. So one of my favorite times during the day is when I get to drive my kids in the car. So every morning, every afternoon during the week, I drop my kids off in the morning, pick my kids up in the afternoon from my parents. And those car rides are awesome. Car rides with kids are hilarious. They talk about the most ridiculous stuff. And so a lot of times when we're driving in the car, my kids are arguing about what crops are planted in the fields and what tractors are being used to, do things in the fields, all kinds of stuff that I just don't understand at all. And so they're always arguing about that stuff. And so recently we were driving in the car one morning and our oldest son asked me, he said, "Dad, what were you doing this morning? What were you doing this morning before we left the house?" And so that morning before we left home, I had gotten an email saying that my wife's paycheck came through. Always a good day when you get an email like that. I was pumped about that. And so before we left home, I got my computer out, logged into Church Center, and I sent in our tithe for that money. And so the kids were asking me about that, trying to figure out what I was doing while I was on my computer while they were eating breakfast. And so I got to explain to them about giving money to God and why we give to God, how much we give to God. And so our son said, "Why did you need to do that this morning? Why'd you do that while we were eating breakfast? Why'd you do that before we left the house?" And that brings us to the next question you may have about giving, which is, when do we give to God? When do we give to God? And this answer is simple. It's first. We give to God first. I told my kids that Emily and I tithe that money that morning because we give God his money first. We don't spend all of our money and then figure out what's left over and then give a little piece to God. We give him the first part of our money. God's the creator of the universe. He's worthy of getting all of our money, and so we can give him the first piece of our money. And the last question I want to look at this morning is where do I give? Where do I give my money? If I want to give money to God, practically, where do I give that money? And so there's a pattern that we see in the New Testament of giving money to the local church, of investing in those who spiritually invest in you. And so my wife and I, we give money to God because our money is his to begin with. And the reason we give our money to Bayshore is because this is our church. This is where we do ministry. And so that's why we give our money here, because Bayshore is where our kids are learning about Jesus on Sundays. This is where we see people's lives being changed. This is where we see people accepting Jesus. So I get to hang out in the lobby on Sundays and I see people grabbing Bibles every single week. I see people grabbing the Following Jesus books that are teaching them the basics of the Christian faith. This is where we see people joining small groups and growing closer to Jesus and each other. And so when we decide practically where to give money to God, it's here. So I asked the question earlier, and we'll put this back on the screen. What impact do we want to have? What impact do we want to have? Well, the impact that our family wants to have is that we want to see more people get baptized. We want to see more kids learn about Jesus on Sundays. We want more people getting Bibles and more people finding small groups. So when we give back to God, it goes here because this is where we're planted and where we see God changing people's lives. And as we close this morning, I want to look at one final verse. The next verse in this prayer, it's verse 18. It says, "O Lord, the God of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, make your people always want to obey you. See to it that their love for you never changes." So as David ends his prayer, he prays for the people to always follow God. He prays that their love for God never changes. He prays that they will always follow God, and he prays that their love for God never changes. And when we think about this question of what impact do we want to have? What impact do we want to have? This is it right here. This is what I want right here from my life. I want to always obey Jesus, and I want my love for him to never change. And that's what I want for my wife. That is what I want for our kids. That is what I want for my parents and my siblings and my nieces and nephews, my aunts and uncles, my cousins. This is what I want for my friends. This is what I want for our church, for every person that walks into this building. We all have time and energy and resources and finances. And so how will we live generously? How will we use what God has given to us to make a lasting impact for him? God is so gracious to give us breath in our lungs and health in our bodies. So we should use every opportunity afforded to us to make an impact for him. Every day is an opportunity to be intentional and to live with purpose. God's been so generous to us. So let's respond to his grace by living generous lives.